Today is our third day, our third podcast, our third week of talking about frugality. We will wrap up next week with the fourth part of frugality. But today, remember, the definition of frugality is the intentional practice of prudent economy. Again, that's the intentional practice of prudent economy. Today we're going to be talking about prudence. I already teased it a little bit in the story with the cars. A good exercise of prudence for me that I had to learn the hard way was to acquire knowledge when it came to picking a good used car that was going to be reliable and affordable for me. Affordable in the sense of maintenance as well as fuel economy. The issue that I had was that I got so excited, I got car fever so bad, and I disregarded so much good and healthy advice from those who were older and wiser than me, those who had made mistakes, that I repeated their mistakes. I bought cars sight unseen. I repeated my own mistakes. It wasn't healthy for me to be going about that. It was unwise. You could say it was imprudent. Prudence is an interesting word. The first time I heard the word prudent, I didn't know exactly what it meant. Now, I understand prudence as not only the exercise of God's wisdom in my faith life, but I understand prudence in the realm of personal finance as being able to prevent undue risk to you. Again, the idea of prudence is limiting undue risk. And we do this by acquiring knowledge, understanding our situation so we can make a decision that we are much less likely to regret later on. In the stories I told about the cars and the car purchases I did, the first two cars you could argue were very imprudent of me. I ignored the advice to see the car in person, inspect it, and test drive it, do some research, sleep on it before buying it. I ended up diving into my car purchases, both feet first, sight unseen, and having to pay through the ears to keep those cars running. I have learned those lessons since then. And I can tell you that a great example of prudence is if you have two cars that you're looking at. They cost the exact same, they have the same mileage, they're both cosmetically identical. The makes and models are different. And one car is terribly unreliable, historically speaking, and another one of those cars is relatively reliable. If you didn't acquire knowledge about both cars, it would be a wash. It would be a toss-up between which one you picked. You might pick it based on what color you liked best. However, if you looked at those cars, you did the research, you realized that one of them is going to be a lot more reliable for you moving forward and is much less likely to put your personal financial future at risk, well, it is the prudent choice. Another great example in personal finance where we can exercise prudence is getting out of debt. Now, I mentioned that there are arguably three things that you can do with money in the budget tip. You can save money, you can spend money, or you can give money. There's arguably a fourth thing, which is burn money. Just throw it away, flush it down the toilet. One of the ways that we as Americans commonly burn and throw away money is by paying that money to fees and interest on debts, especially consumer debts that are unsecured and purely for consumption purposes. When we are paying loans and just living in a cycle of debt, we are more likely to be trapped in a paycheck to paycheck cycle, and we are throwing away a chunk of our biggest wealth building tool, our income, to fees and interest. This is unhealthy and imprudent on the whole, and I'm going to give you a little bit of an example of why. I have a story about a pharaoh. Now, the pharaoh, the king of Egypt, let's say hypothetically, had 4 soldiers who carried him everywhere. If he traveled up and down the Nile and he left his boat, he would have these 4 soldiers, his closest 4 soldiers, the 4 men that he trusted the most, have these 4 men carry him anywhere and everywhere. Unfortunately, in a war against Babylon, one of these 4 most trusted soldiers, a commander, died. As a result, the pharaoh needed to find someone else who could replace this ever-beloved and trusted soldier. He gathered all of the best soldiers who had survived the battle and asked them, if you were carrying me along a pass and there was a steep cliff, how close could you carry me to the edge of the cliff? Well, the first soldier said, oh, I could probably carry you about 2 feet away from the cliff, and I could do it safely. The second soldier said, oh, I could do better than that. I could carry you 1.5 feet away from the edge. The next soldier says, I could do a 1/2 foot. Another soldier says, I will carry you with my toes hanging over the edge. Now, this is the way that we are with debt in America. How close can we get to the edge of slipping into a financial disaster with debt? The first soldier might be someone, oh, I could go out and I can get a HELOC. It's okay. I'm going to do a home repair. It's going to be safe. It's going to be important. It's going to help build equity into the home. But then it's like, oh, I can do more. I can do more. And all the way up to the end where you're flirting with the idea of pursuing payday loans that charge over 600% in interest. Now, the Pharaoh, in picking a soldier, notices that there's one soldier who hasn't given an answer. And he says, Sir, how close could you carry me to the edge? And this soldier says, Your Highness, Pharaoh, king of the land, if I were carrying you, I would carry you as far away from the edge as possible. All the other soldiers laughed and said, oh, he's clearly not very brave. He's not willing to take on any risk. But the Pharaoh said, I choose you to be the next individual who can help carry me through the passage. The Pharaoh chose the person who was going to be most prudent with his life and not risk his life for just the sake of doing it. In our life with debt, debt is basically consuming our income if we carry it. And it's putting an undue risk on our financial future. It's the more debt that we dive into, the tighter and tighter we are tied up, and the harder it is to save and live and give in our hope-filled financial future. And I want more than that for you. So good exercise of prudence, a good exercise of frugality is to get out of debt. Debt is not frugal and debt is not prudent, with the exception of a mortgage. And that's something that we'll have to talk about on a future show. One more facet of prudence that I want to talk about is opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is, well, if I buy this thing, I can't buy that thing. And if I can't buy that thing, then there's something that I can't do. An example would be if I go out and I ate out and it wasn't necessarily something that I had planned, well, I might not be able to then afford that cup of coffee in the morning that I would get on the way to work the next 5 days throughout the week in order to compensate for it. The problem is you can have an infinite number of opportunity cost examples for any one given purchase. The problem with opportunity cost is it has an infinite number of comparisons, and it makes it very hard to exercise prudence when you're making a purchase. How do you know what specifically you're giving up? The answer is writing a zero-based budget. If you have a zero-based budget and you apply a mission to every dollar, you assign every dollar a category, and you decide that you need to spend differently, that you need to move money around, that you need to spend more on something specifically, then the opportunity cost is going to be the thing that you pull from next. The opportunity cost is the next best thing that money would have otherwise gone to. The lowest priority that can be sacrificed in order to support what it is that you need to apply more funds to. This is a prudent way of understanding opportunity cost because it's the realistic way. Where would the money have gone if you didn't have to move it? And the only way we know that is if everything else is already assigned, everything else is already covered. We don't have to look at that and say, this is the opportunity cost, because you know what it is that you're going to be sacrificing. In order to pay for this, you're going to be sacrificing that on paper, on purpose, before you spend the money. In closing, prudence is an essential part of frugality. It is an essential part of making decisions in your personal financial life. It is one of the most important topics that we can cover, being wise with our money in a way that reduces the amount of risk on us and has a long-term mindset. We don't want to be just thinking in today. We don't want to just be thinking in the moment. We don't want to be the teenager who has car fever and can't see the next few months of paying for repairs on a troubled vehicle. We need to have a long-term mindset. We need to have long-term goals. We need to be not only planning for ourselves today, but planning for ourselves tomorrow. Next week, we're going to finish our 4-part series on frugality by talking about economy. Until then, budget bravely and enjoy your hope-filled financial future. Thank you.